Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be doing an Outlaw Rogue PvP guide, showing you everything that you need to know in order to pick up Outlaw Rogue for current season of Season 1 of Shadowlands patch 9.0.2. I've been playing a lot of Outlaw Rogue for PvP in my free time, 2v2s, 3v3s, BGs, as well as World PvP, and I've also done a lot of research for the spec, from other players playing the spec and what talents they play and what some of the viable different playstyle, as well as other research as well, in order to combine my experience as well as research together for this comprehensive guide. For any of you guys that are first time trying out Outlaw Rogue as a very first time Rogue player, or maybe somebody who been playing Rogue for a while and are just trying to find another spec to play and might be able to find home with Outlaw. First of all, question of viability. How good is Outlaw? Is it actually that good? Is it A tier, B tier, F tier? Does it have potential, or is it kind of dead in the water? It's definitely a lot better than where it was in BFA. There's a couple things that make the spec a lot stronger. First of all, wound poison returns. That means that we got Mortal Strike effect. Mortal Strike is insanely strong for PvP. Classes with Mortal Strike are ahead of classes that do not have Mortal Strike. So having a baseline Mortal Strike with poisons is a massive advantage for this spec in particular. Also, Kindle Shot returns, so if you didn't like the way Between the Eyes played and couldn't really figure out the best way to play with it, and didn't like the shorter duration of Between the Eyes baseline compared to normal Kindle Shot returns, which makes the spec a little bit more standardized and simply easier to approach. Also, I feel like the spec damage-wise is a lot better. The spec has always been really good on CC, but the damage department always lacked. And while in this expansion it doesn't seem the spec does a crazy amount of burst out of nowhere, it definitely does put up a bit more sustain on the enemy. With good sustain as well as the crazy, ludicrous amount of CC that this spec brings, I feel like Outlaw ends up being in a much better spot than it was in all of expansion of BFA. Next, let's move on to the talents. What are going to be some of the best talents for you to try and what is viable for what situation? First row, Quick Draw ends up being the strongest option. The extra damage and common points is generally nice. There is opportunity to play with Weapon Master, but we'll get to that when we talk about legendaries. Level 25, I love me some acrobatic strikes. Having extra range on enemies is crucial in certain situations like melee. If you have a slow on them, you have a slow on you, you're far enough away they can't reach you, but you can poke at them with that extra 3 yards. It can be quite hilarious and give you that advantage for kite ability. Also, those mages that like to Nova you in place and cast G-Pie while laughing in your face, they don't usually run super far away, and having that extra range on your kicks can be quite nice. Retractable hook is also a really solid option. The grapple hook speed is really good for being able to grapple to a healer as they cast a spell and kind of almost shadow stepping behind them, and gives you generally insane mobility for Outlaw Rogue. So whichever one of those you think is going to be best for you, pick which one you like. In level 30, we'll actually PvE down our enemies as Outlaw. We're going to go Deeper Stratagem. Scaling is off, so Deeper Stratagem is in. It was a strong talent when it comes to the last expansion for damage, but it's really strong now here because we have a lot more output of damage with no scaling. And this ends up being the best one for DPS, so if you're playing 2v2s as Outlaw Rogue with a healer, you'll probably end up wanting to run Deeper Strat. Mark for Death now is playable though, because now you can use Mark for Death kidney shots like you would with Assassination last expansion. You can go for Mark for Death Slice and Dice if you feel like you need Slice and Dice uptime, Mark for Death Dispatch for damage if you want to. Mark for Death just has a bit more utilitarian playstyle, and I end up finding myself playing that more in 3v3s in particular, but pick whichever one you like more. Level 35, you can go Iron Stomach for self-healing in World PvP or in BGs where there's no healer. Cheat Death for those rogues that run 100% crit and you know you're just going to get one shot, so maybe with Cheat Death you might be able to survive it and have a counter attack. Generally for PvP, Elusiveness ends up being the solid option for everything. The talent of Blinding Powder is really hard to pass up. It's just a very solid talent, shortening the cooldown of a blind, giving you an extra range. Really solid because you'll blind the enemy, they'll generally trinket it, and then you'll have a blind next time you have a go, and they won't have a trinket because yours has a shorter cooldown. Then we have the choice of Dreadblades or Alacrity. Dreadblades is really interesting. It does give us a lot of comm points that we can just kind of flurry at the enemy, and that's a lot of finishers for a lot of damage. It is on GCD, it is 30 energy, it does consume some of your health, so you better be careful when you use it. Make sure that you have an enemy stunned before you apply it. Alacrity ends up being the box standard. If you want kind of like a basic playstyle suggestion, at 18% and over haste, Dreadblades is viable. Under 18% haste, better go Alacrity. Next two abilities are very similar. Blade Rush more consistent, Killing Spree more bursty, but not that much more bursty. So killing spree can be used if you're going to be trying to kind of nuke the enemy, one-shot him, or if you're going to be breaking out of roots regularly. Blade Rush is great for mobility and also great for that sustained playstyle. Blade Rush ends up being slightly better in this role. For Honor Talent, the first viable one is Maneuverability. Sprint gives you that movement suppression that lets you escape the enemy or run at them. Mobility can save rogues, and mobility can give you more DPS since the enemy can't get away from you. A very solid option in a variety of different situations. Next we have Control as King, but this ability is a little bit bugged. I'll explain the bug after we will go over the talents, but anytime enemies are stunned by you or others, silenced or polymorphed, you gain 3 seconds of Adrenaline Rush. Really solid for sustained playstyle. Outlaw Rogue is the only spec that can efficiently deal with melee thanks to Dismantle, an ability for you to kind of disarm the enemy. Very strong against melee classes and allows you to kind of stand toe to toe with them. Very solid option, but if you're fighting casters, definitely do not pick that one. Tricks of Trade is a very solid option for 3v3s. Outlaw Rogues don't necessarily need damage anymore, so if you feel like you need to run Thick as Thieves to amplify your damage, you don't necessarily have to in this expansion. However, if you're doing 3v3s or double DPS 2v2s and want to make sure you and your partner have a really solid burst opportunity because it is 20% damage increase for your party, then this is a very solid option, but not necessary for the Outlaw Rogue damage output anymore. Do I even need to explain Smoke Bomb? Opportunity for rogues to lock down somebody inside of a smoke so no heals can go inside or out. Has a variety of different uses in PvP and particularly good in arenas. I would run some nails in Battlegrounds, but very solid choice with Smoke Bomb. When playing with Control as King, you should be careful, as not a lot of guides will let you know this, but Control as King right now overwrites your currently active Adrenaline Rush. That means if you press the ability of Adrenaline Rush and then follow up a kidney shot onto an enemy, it will remove your current active Adrenaline Rush that you just used, the 3-minute cooldown, and give you a measly 3-second Adrenaline Rush instead. Use Adrenaline Rush when playing with Control as King separately, away from your stuns, and try to make sure that when you are using Adrenaline Rush, you will not have any counter CC. So playing with a mage, and if he's going to be going for a bunch of polys, hold on to your Adrenaline Rush for a later time. Playing with a classic and silence like a Shadow Priest, they're going to be going for CC chain with silence. Hold off on your Adrenaline Rush. You kind of want to use Adrenaline Rush not with your goes, but like during downtime when you're just trying to pump damage after a CC chain. Generally, this Honor Talent is still a really strong one and something you will want to rock on your rogue for the most part. But do be aware that it is bugged, especially if you're using legendaries that play with a damage increase of your Adrenaline Rush, because then you might lose out on value. Next, we'll talk about Outlaw Rogue legendaries, and I would say for this spec, there's a lot more choices in what legendaries you can run, because of the PvE-centric sustained heavy playstyle translates pretty well into PvP. There are actually some solid options. There is one legendary you can always run, which is Mark of the Master Assassin. It's always a solid one for all 3 specs of rogues, and it ends up being working out pretty well for Outlaw because you cooldown for Vanish isn't actually 2 minutes. Because of the cooldown reduction mechanics as well as the buff mechanic for Outlaw Rogue to amplify that cooldown reduction, you can actually use Vanish a lot more often than the other specs. So being able to use a Vanish for burst or maybe Vanish to amplify burst afterwards, it's not a terrible combo. Then you also have Celerity, which is a legendary that a lot of other rogues have crafted for PvE, but also usable for PvP. As long as you're able to get the full value of an Adrenaline Rush, 8% extra damage plus Sliciness giving you random Adrenaline Rushes is quite huge. Extra damage here and there amplifies that same playstyle and puts more pressure on the enemy. It's also very easy to play with, but if you are playing Control as King, be aware of the bugs in order to maximize the value of your Adrenaline Rush, because that ability will now become a very important and powerful cooldown for you to use. Concealed Blunderbuss is another Lego that you can actually play with, really good for sustained playstyle, where Sinister Strike secondary hits has a 40% chance to make your pistol shot overload and fire like a blunderbuss. With this one, you want to play Deeper Strat as well as Weapon Master because you'll be generating a lot of comm points. It won't matter the damage increase with Quick Draw, it'll be more opportunity for you with Weapon Master to generate more of those procs. So if you are playing that Lego, which is actually a very fun playstyle, Weapon Master and Deeper Stratagem are a must. While we're still doing some more prep work, let's dive into the Conduits. The best Conduit for Outlaw Rogue for PvP is going to be Count the Odds. If you don't have this one at a higher level, Sleight of Hand is also another decent alternative. Count the Odds lets you ambushes as well as dispatches, most of them are going to be dispatches, have a chance to give you extra buffs. As Outlaw Rogues, we embrace RNG, and as we are pumping dispatches into our enemies looking to score a kill, getting more buffs just makes us stronger. So you can quickly, if you play very specific playstyles and get super lucky, get yourself basically a 5 buff just for attacking the enemy, which will make you even stronger, and it has a very powerful snowball effect. But most of the times, rogues will end up going for defensive conduits and endurance conduits because survivability is important. Prepared for All is a very powerful conduit. It's a finesse conduit. Dodging enemies gives you shorter CD on evasion, and interrupting enemies gives you shorter CD on Cloak of Shadows. We dodge quite a lot, even sometimes when we don't press evasion as rogues, so being able to get your defensives back faster for cloak and evasion is a no-brainer good idea for PvP. Then we also have Cloaked in Shadows, ends up being a very strong defensive endurance conduit for rogues. When we are in stealth or after we go for a vanish, we gain a small shield for a little bit of time that gives us a little bit of a defensive. When you're opening on the enemy and you're expecting them to have a counterattack to your rogue bursty opener, Cloaked in Shadows ends up being the one that saves you. Recuperator is also pretty good. Slice and Dice giving you extra healing can be good in a long-term fight for 2v2s, 3v3s where every bit of healing can count. Now let's talk a bit about the playstyle and the rotation for Outlaw. The one thing that rogues generally are good at is openers, and Outlaw Rogue is very simple. If you're running Mark for Death, you can go for Mark for Death Kidney Shot in the opener on the enemy and just kind of build up your damage from there, or simply open up on the enemy with a cheap shot. If you are not running Mark for Death and you want to save a Kidney Shot for an enemy later, don't cheap shot him in the opener, just open with an ambush. Particularly good in 2v2 situations where it's all about the damage you output and kind of like PvEing your enemy into the ground with some cross CC here and there. But the playstyle, the opener, not super important. What you should maintain though is Slice and Dice. Never maintain it above 4 or 5 common points, always about 3. And generally you want to use it during your downtime. You don't want to have to refresh Slice and Dice as you're lining up for a big go on the enemy. You kind of already want to have Slice and Dice already pre-rolling on the target before you really end up going for some damage yourself. Next, Roll the Bones. You want to make sure you have at least one buff of Roll the Bones active. Some buffs are better than others, and the best buffs are going to be the Shark buff, or at least I like to call it Shark buff, as well as the Broadsides. Another one that's pretty good too is True Bearing for the cooldown reduction. These are going to be your best for damage. However, Outlaw Rogue doesn't really need any buffs to do damage. In fact, as long as you have Slice and Dice and all your other debuffs rolling, you should be okay, but they definitely help you bring the target down much quicker. The debuff you will want to maintain on the enemy is between the eyes. You'll try to kind of line it up after you line up a Kidney Shot on the enemy or before it. It does kind of let the enemy know that, hey, that's the target you're probably going to be focusing on one between the eyes, but more chances to crit on the enemy is quite good. The more chances to crit, the more likely you'll have an opportunity to be able to, well, hit the enemy a little bit harder. Most of the classes don't really look for crit as a stat, but Outlaw gains so much crit naturally through buffs as well as debuffs, you might as well apply them on the enemy. If your abilities crit a lot, enemies die quicker, so why not? Ends up being generally a debuff to maintain at all times. And outside of that, slam the enemies down into Kidney Shots when you're going for a go. Have some energy available before you're going to have that go. Throw a bunch of cooldowns together if you have any available into the enemy from your killing sprees or blade rushes or a full-blown adrenaline rush, and then that's really about it. Combine all that damage playstyle with the massive array of CC, with the blinds, Kidney Shots, gouges, as well as interrupts. You utilize everything you have in order to lock the enemies out from being able to heal their allies or from being able to help themselves with a defensive cooldown. Playing defensively as a rogue can be quite difficult in PvP, but the first thing you should utilize is your defensives, like the basic abilities. Your self-heal as well as feint, maybe even utilizing mobility to just grapple away from an enemy or sprinting away from him while hitting him with a slow. Sometimes just going for resets and avoiding the enemy is better than actually having to fight the enemy and taking the damage to the face. Another thing you can also do as a rogue is utilize your defensives with a maximum usage. Cloak of Shadows and Evasion are very, very powerful, so utilizing them with the most value can be quite difficult. The general tools and tips that I have for you to maximize the value of your defensives is to wait until the enemy committed some real powerful cooldowns. Once they have committed those powerful cooldowns into you, it is then fine to use a defensive. Like for example, if a warrior got you speared down with a Spear of Bastion, they got Avatar rolling Warbreaker available, perfectly fine to pop Evasion and then try to reduce that damage as much as you can. Mage dropping down a massive meteor on you with combustion ready to go, feel free to Cloak of Shadows. So first see if there's a way for you to avoid the enemy with line of sight or simply running, and if there's no way, then you should use defensives. Rogues are pretty squishy, so using defensives early, or at least maybe coordinate with the healer, letting him know, or having him know when do you need defenses, when should you use defenses, or when can healer cover you, in 2v2s or maybe 3v3s is also something. But if you're not sure, generally using yours while you're at high health is the playstyle for most rogues. The safer we are, the better off we are. But that's more of a rogue general thing rather than outlaw specific thing. And finally, gearing. Gearing a rogue as outlaw for PvP, you're going to want to get as much versatility as possible. PvP stats are not really a thing in this expansion, but versatility ends up being the unofficial PvP stat. Especially when you have the double PvP trinket combo where you get 40% more value aggressively from your versatility on the offensive and the self-heal value. Versatility also makes you less squishy, so it ends up being a really good stat. Second best stat you'll want as outlaw is haste. Haste gives you more energy regen as well as more auto attacks, but also lowers down the GCD so you can fit all your abilities during your go. So when you're playing your outlaw, versatility is going to be the best stat to look forward to. In some cases, you might actually want to consider downgrading to lower item level pieces in order to gain more versa, but generally you don't want to lose the stamina, you don't really want to lose the agility. So try to fish for as many versatility pieces as possible, and that's pretty easy if you primarily PvP, as every piece of PvP gear for honor as well as conquest always comes with a lot of versatility. Since we're all versa heavy, we'll want as much versatility in our rings for enchants. So enchants for rings are going to be versatility. In your boots, you want to go with agility enchant. For your weapons, you'll want to have one celestial guidance, and it's recommended to have one as sinful revelation. You'll also want to have Cloak enchanted with extra stamina to make sure that you have that survivability as a rogue. That's going to be about all the enchants you're going to want to look out for. For gems, you also want to go with versatility gems as well. And that's really about everything you need to know for rogues and enchanting on your gear. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys found this video enjoyable and might have learned a thing or two. Hopefully some of you guys might even give Outlaw a serious try in PvP. It's a very fun spec to play, and it's very unique. There's a lot of crowd control, from gouge to the kidney shots you can return to the wound poison, that the spec feels a lot more whole and a lot more wholesome now. Huge fan of what Blizzard has done with it, and I feel like it's in a much better, miles better position than where it was back when it comes to BFA. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.